She Died returns with a horrifying message from Jesus about Elon Musk. The pain struck without warning, a vicious fist crushing my chest just as I finished whispering amen through the haze of agony. I could see James, my beloved husband of 40 years, lying motionless in his hospice bed beside me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been praying for his terminal cancer, yet here I was, collapsing to my knees, my heart betraying me at the most critical moment. Grandma little Sarah's voice drifted from the hallway, followed by the sound of running feet. I tried to call out, to warn them not to come in, to spare them from what was happening, but my voice failed me. The room began to spin, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window creating strange, dancing patterns on the wall. I heard the door burst open, followed by 3 distinct gasps. Sarah, Emily, and Michael, my precious grandchildren, stood frozen in the doorway. Their eyes widened with horror as they took in the scene: their grandfather unconscious in his bed, their grandmother crumpled on the floor beside him. Mum. Dad, Michael, only 12 but already so brave, screamed for his parents downstairs. Something's wrong with Grandma and Grandpa. The world started to fade, but not before I saw Sarah, sweet 9-year-old Sarah, drop to her knees beside me, her small hands clutching mine. Please, God, she sobbed, not both of them. Please don't take both of them. As darkness crept in from the edges of my vision, I felt a strange sensation as if my spirit was being gently lifted from my body. The last thing I heard was Emily's trembling voice calling 911, and then everything changed. The pain vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace, and a brilliant light began to envelop me. My journey was about to begin. If this opening story has touched your heart and awakened something deep within your soul, join our spiritual journey by subscribing. Together, we'll explore more divine revelations that could forever change your understanding of life, faith, and miracles. My name is Clara Dawson, and until that fateful day, I had lived what most would call an ordinary life in our small town of Milton, Massachusetts. For 40 years, I had walked hand in hand with James through life's joys and sorrows, our faith in God growing stronger with each step we took together. I was born into a modest family, the daughter of a carpenter and a schoolteacher who instilled in me the values of faith, hard work, and compassion. Every Sunday, without fail, we would attend the First Baptist Church, where the seeds of my devotion were planted and nurtured. It was there, in that very church, that I first met James during a youth group meeting in 1983. He had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen and a faith that matched my own. Our courtship was simple but profound, built on shared values and an unwavering belief in God's plan. We married young, just 22, and started our life together with nothing but love, faith, and dreams. James worked as an accountant while I taught Sunday school, eventually becoming one of the church's most dedicated community leaders. Over the years, our family grew. We were blessed with 3 children: Rebecca, Thomas, and Matthew, each of them now grown with families of their own. Our 6 grandchildren became the light of our retirement years, filling our home with laughter and innocent questions about God and heaven. Sarah, Emily, Michael, Joshua, Daniel, and little Rachel, each one a precious gift from above. Our home became a sanctuary for more than just our family. Every Wednesday evening, we hosted Bible study groups, where neighbors would gather to discuss scripture and share their struggles and victories. Through financial hardships, health scares, and personal losses, our faith remained unshaken. I remember telling everyone, God never gives you more than you can handle with His help. I served our church community in every way I could, organizing food drives for the homeless, visiting sick congregation members, and leading women's prayer groups. The pastor once called me the heart of our church family, but I never saw myself that way. I was simply doing what the Lord had called me to do, following His gentle guidance in serving others. James and I saved carefully over the years, planning for a quiet retirement where we could spend more time in service to our church and community. We had simple dreams, tending to my garden, watching our grandchildren grow, and growing old together while sharing God's love with others. But as they say, life is what happens while you're making other plans. Looking back now, I realize how every moment of my life, every joy and trial, was preparing me for what was to come. The countless hours spent in prayer, the deep discussions about faith with James, The tears and laughter shared with our church family, all of it was shaping me for a purpose I couldn't have imagined. Even my daily routine had spiritual significance: morning prayers in my garden as the sun rose, afternoon Bible reading in my favorite chair by the window, and evening devotions with James before bed. Our lives weren't extraordinary by worldly standards, but they were rich in faith and love, which I've come to understand is the greatest wealth of all. Little did I know that God was about to use my ordinary life in an extraordinary way, that my decades of unwavering faith were about to be tested in ways I never thought possible. As I would soon learn, sometimes God chooses the most unlikely messengers to share his most important messages. Everything changed 6 months ago when James came home from his routine checkup with news that would shake our world to its core. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the doctor's words fell like heavy stones in our peaceful living room. I remember the way James held my hand, his grip firm despite the tremor in his voice, as he said, "Clara, whatever happens, God is still good." The following weeks became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and endless consultations. Our savings, carefully built over decades, began to dwindle rapidly. The medical bills mounted like an unstoppable tide, but our church family stepped in without hesitation. They organized fundraisers, prepared meals, and most importantly, surrounded us with constant prayer. I watched my strong, vibrant husband grow weaker day by day. The man who once carried our grandchildren on his shoulders now needed help walking to the bathroom. Yet his faith never wavered. Each morning, no matter how much pain he was in, James would insist on reading his Bible. "This body may be failing," he would say, "but my spirit grows stronger every day." The hardest part wasn't the financial strain or the exhausting hospital routine, it was watching our grandchildren try to understand why their beloved grandpa was fading away. Sarah, our oldest grandchild, would sit by James's bed for hours, reading him stories from her children's Bible, her small voice full of determination to bring him comfort just as he had always comforted her. Our children took turns staying with us, helping with James's care while juggling their own families and jobs. Rebecca, our eldest, quit her job in Boston to move back home. Thomas and Matthew drove hours every weekend to be with us. The strain showed on their faces, but they never complained. Instead, they would gather around James's bed, sharing memories and laughter, making every moment count. The cancer was aggressive, spreading rapidly despite the treatments. Each scan brought worse news, yet our doctor was amazed by James's peaceful demeanor. "In all my years of practice," he said, "I've never seen someone face terminal illness with such grace." James would simply smile and say, "It's not my strength, Doc, it's the Lord's." Our home became a place of both sorrow and extraordinary love. Church members would stop by daily, bringing not just casseroles and cards, but their presence and prayers. Even in his weakened state, James would ask about their lives, their struggles, their joys. "Just because I'm sick," he'd say, "doesn't mean I can't still be a witness for Christ." The medical bills continued to mount, forcing us to make difficult decisions. We sold our car, then my precious collection of antique quilts, and finally had to consider selling our home. But each time we faced a financial crisis, God provided through unexpected means: an anonymous donation, a church fundraiser that exceeded all expectations, or a medical bill mysteriously marked paid in full. Through it all, our faith grew deeper, stronger. Each trial seemed to strip away something of this world while strengthening our grip on eternal truths. James would often quote from Romans, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." As James's condition worsened, our home became filled with medical equipment, oxygen tanks, hospital beds, monitors beeping through the night. Yet somehow it also became more sacred, as if the veil between heaven and earth was growing thinner. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, as I sat watching James sleep, I could almost feel the presence of angels. The moment my spirit separated from my body was unlike anything I could have imagined. The crushing chest pain vanished, replaced by an incredible lightness. I found myself floating near the ceiling of our bedroom, looking down at the chaos unfolding below. My body lay crumpled beside James's bed, our grandchildren's terrified faces illuminated by the afternoon sun streaming through the window. The scene below seemed to move in slow motion. I watched as Thomas and Rebecca burst into the room, their faces contorted with panic. Rebecca immediately dropped to her knees beside my body, her medical training taking over as she checked for a pulse. Thomas stood frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. I wanted to reach out, to tell them I was fine, but I couldn't interact with the physical world anymore. Then I noticed something extraordinary. There were beings of light in the room that nobody else could see. They weren't the stereotypical angels with wings and halos that you see in paintings. They were pure, radiant energy, their presence both powerful and gentle. One of them turned to me, and though it had no physical face, I could feel its smile, its welcome. "Fear not," Clara the angel spoke, not with words but directly into my consciousness. "Your time has not yet come, but there is much you need to see." The angel's voice carried the warmth of 1,000 sunsets and the depth of infinite wisdom. I felt completely at peace in its presence, despite the heart-rending scene below. As the paramedics rushed into our bedroom, their urgent voices and quick movements seemed distant and unimportant. The physical world began to fade as a brilliant light appeared above me, growing stronger and more beautiful by the second. It wasn't harsh or blinding, rather, it was the most natural and comforting light I'd ever experienced, like the essence of every sunrise I'd ever witnessed distilled into pure energy. I felt myself being drawn upward, passing through the ceiling as if it were made of mist. The ascent was gentle but swift, and suddenly I found myself above our small town. I could see for miles in every direction, but the sight was different from anything earthly. I could perceive not just the physical buildings and streets, but also the spiritual reality overlaying them, countless threads of light connecting people, prayers rising like golden streams into the heavens, and dark shadows where pain and suffering lingered. The angel beside me gestured toward these sights. "This is the world as it truly is, Clara. What humans see is only a fraction of reality." I watched in amazement as a simple act of kindness, a young man helping an elderly woman with her groceries, created ripples of light that touched dozens of other lives. A mother's prayer for her child sent waves of protective energy spanning several blocks. As we ascended higher, the earth began to fade below us. The physical realm gave way to something far more real, more substantial. Colors I had never seen before danced around us, and music, unlike anything earthly, filled my being, not heard with ears, but felt with my entire essence. It was as if every beautiful piece of music ever created was merely an echo of this celestial symphony. The angel guided me through what seemed like layers of reality, each one more glorious than the last. I saw gatherings of heavenly beings, their light and love so intense it would have been overwhelming if not for my guide's protective presence. They seemed to be both working and worshipping, their activities beyond my comprehension, but clearly purposeful. "These are the watchers," my guide explained. "They observe and record every action, every prayer, every act of love or kindness on earth. Nothing is forgotten in heaven's archives." I watched in wonder as they moved with perfect coordination, their activities creating complex patterns of light and energy that somehow affected the world below. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The music, the movement, the endless dance of colors all paused as if holding its breath. A new presence was approaching, one so powerful that even the angels bowed in reverence. The light, already brilliant, intensified to a degree that should have been impossible to bear, yet it felt like coming home. The presence approached, and every fiber of my being recognized him before I even saw him. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, stood before me. His appearance was both human and divine, familiar yet utterly transcendent. His eyes held the depth of eternity, filled with such perfect love that I fell to my knees, tears of joy streaming down my spiritual form. "My child," he spoke, and his voice resonated through every level of creation. It was like thunder and a whisper simultaneously, powerful enough to shake mountains, yet gentle enough to calm a frightened child. "You have carried your cross with faith, and your prayers have been heard." I wanted to speak, to express the overwhelming love and gratitude I felt, but no words seemed adequate. He smiled, understanding my heart without the need for words. "I know about James." He continued, "I know about your pain, your struggles, your unwavering faith through it all. Nothing is hidden from my sight." He reached out and helped me to my feet, his touch sending waves of pure love through my entire being. The memories of every prayer I'd ever prayed, every tear I'd ever shed, every moment of doubt and faith flashed before me. In his presence, I understood that every single moment had been precious, every struggle purposeful. "Clara," he said, his voice filled with both authority and compassion, "I have brought you here for a purpose greater than yourself. Your life, your faith, your love for others, these have prepared you for what I must show you." As he spoke, scenes began to appear around us, like living paintings suspended in the heavenly realm. I saw my own life from a heavenly perspective, moments when I thought I was alone but was actually surrounded by angels, times when my simple acts of kindness had far-reaching consequences I never knew about. I saw how my Sunday school teachings had planted seeds of faith that would bear fruit for generations. But now Jesus continued, "I must show you more. You must witness both the glory and the burden of what is to come." His expression grew more serious, though no less loving. "Will you trust me, Clara, even when what I show you breaks your heart? Will you carry this message back to a world that may not want to hear it?" Without hesitation, I answered, "Yes, Lord. I am your servant." The words came from the depths of my soul, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. Jesus smiled again, and the love in his eyes was enough to overwhelm all fear, all doubt, all hesitation. He then showed me a vision of James, my beloved husband, lying in his hospital bed below. "Your love for him is precious to me," Jesus said softly. "His faith, even in suffering, has been a testimony to many. But Clara, you must understand, everything that is about to happen serves a greater purpose than you can now imagine." The scene shifted, and I saw our grandchildren, Sarah, Emily, Michael, and the others, their futures spreading out before them like threads of light. Some paths led to glory, others to hardship, but all were held in his loving hands. "They will face challenges you cannot imagine," Jesus explained, "but your testimony will give them strength in their darkest hours." Then, with infinite tenderness, he took my hands in his. I could see the scars from the crucifixion, marks of love that had purchased humanity's redemption. "Are you ready?" he asked, "to see what few mortals have seen, to understand what few have understood? The burden will be heavy, but I will be with you always." Before I could respond, a door appeared before us, not a physical door, but a gateway of pure light. Through it, I could sense both tremendous glory and deep sorrow waiting. Jesus stood beside me, his presence both comforting and strengthening. "Through this door," he said, "you will see the spiritual battle that rages unseen on earth. You will understand why your faith, and the faith of all my children, is more precious than gold." Through the doorway of light, Jesus led me to what appeared to be a great amphitheater of heaven. Countless angels surrounded us in concentric circles, their presence creating a symphony of light and love. In the center, a scene from earth materialized: my husband James, still lying in his hospital bed, surrounded by our grieving family. "Clara," Jesus spoke, his voice filling the vast space, "I offer you a choice that few have ever been given." He gestured towards two paths that suddenly appeared before us, each glowing with different intensities of light. "You may choose to return to earth and continue your life, or you may take James's burden of suffering upon yourself, allowing him to live." My heart leapt at the possibility of saving James, but Jesus raised his hand, indicating there was more to understand. "This choice carries consequences beyond what you can see," he continued. "If you choose to take James's place, you will experience not only his physical suffering but also bear a spiritual burden that will test your faith to its very limits." Images flashed before us: James recovering miraculously, our grandchildren rejoicing, the doctors baffled by his sudden healing. But alongside these joyful scenes, I saw myself enduring not just the cancer that afflicted James, but also profound spiritual trials that would shake the very foundation of my faith. "Lord," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion, "I would give anything to save James. But please help me understand, is this truly your will, or is this another kind of test?" The wisdom I'd gained through years of Bible study surfaced in my mind, reminding me that sometimes the obvious choice isn't always God's choice. Jesus smiled, and in that smile, I saw both approval and deeper purpose. "You have learned well, my child," he said. "This choice is not what it appears. It is a test of both love and wisdom. The scenes before us shifted, revealing a broader perspective of God's plan, one that encompassed not just our family but countless others who would be touched by our testimony. I watched as two possible futures unfolded. In one, I sacrificed myself for James, showing great love but potentially disrupting God's greater plan. In the other, I trusted in God's purpose even through pain, and our shared suffering became a powerful testimony that would lead many to faith. "Remember Job," Jesus said gently. His trials were not just about his own faith, but about showing the power of unwavering trust in God's plan. The comparison humbled me, and I began to understand that sometimes the greatest act of love is trusting in God's wisdom, rather than choosing what seems most loving to human eyes. Tears streamed down my spiritual form as I responded, "Lord, I choose your will above my own. If our suffering can bring glory to your name and help others find faith, then let it be so." The moment these words left my lips, the entire heavenly host erupted in praise, their light growing so intense it seemed to shake the very foundations of heaven. Jesus drew me close, and I felt his divine approval wash over me like a warm wave. "You have chosen wisely, Clara. This was not just a test of love for James, but a test of your trust in my perfect plan. Now I will show you why this choice was so important." The scene before us transformed once again, revealing how our family's journey through suffering would impact countless lives. I saw people in hospital waiting rooms finding hope through our story, doubters coming to faith after witnessing our unwavering trust in God, and our grandchildren developing a deep, unshakable faith through watching our example. "Your submission to my will," Jesus explained, "allows me to work in ways that a simple miracle could not. Through your family's faithful endurance, many will find their way to me." The truth of his words resonated deep within my soul, and I understood that true love sometimes means accepting God's path rather than choosing what seems most loving to us. As this revelation settled in my spirit, the heavenly amphitheater transformed into what I can only describe as a spiritual battlefield. Jesus stood beside me as the veil between the physical and spiritual realms was pulled back completely, revealing a war that had been raging since the beginning of time. "Watch carefully, Clara," Jesus commanded, his voice carrying both authority and sorrow. "What I show you now is the truth behind the struggles on earth." Before us, I saw golden warriors of light angels of incredible power and beauty engaged in combat with darker entities that made my soul shudder. These battles weren't fought with physical weapons, but with truth against lies, hope against despair, faith against doubt. The scene shifted to our small town, and I gasped at what I saw. Above every home, every business, every church, spiritual battles were taking place. Angels stood guard over praying families, while dark forces sought entry through doors opened by anger, addiction, and lost faith. Above our local church, a particular intense battle raged, prayers rising like golden shields, deflecting attacks from the enemy. "Your weekly prayer groups," Jesus explained, pointing to streams of light rising from various homes, "have created protective barriers over your community. Each sincere prayer, each act of faith, strengthens these defenses." I watched in awe as the prayers of elderly Mrs. Thompson, who could barely leave her house, created powerful waves of protective light over the entire neighborhood. But then Jesus showed me the gaps in these defenses, places where faith had grown cold, where churches had compromised truth for popularity, where families had abandoned prayer and Bible study. Through these gaps, darkness seeped in like poisonous smoke, affecting everything it touched. I saw how a single family's loss of faith could create a vulnerability that impacted dozens of others. "The enemy's greatest weapon," Jesus said, his voice heavy with significance, "is not direct attack, but subtle deception. He convinces my children that their faith is optional, that prayer is ineffective, that scripture is outdated." The vision expanded, showing how these lies spread through communities like a spiritual virus. I watched as a teenage girl's crisis of faith created a ripple effect through her youth group. But then I saw something extraordinary: the prayers of her grandmother, rising like a golden shield, protecting her from complete spiritual destruction until she could find her way back to faith. "This is why the prayers of the righteous are so precious to me," Jesus explained. "They sustain faith through generations." The vision shifted again, revealing the spiritual reality of our hospital rooms, places where life and death, faith and doubt, hope and despair intersected daily. I saw angels stationed in every room, their presence stronger where prayer was present. Above James's room, an especially bright company of angels stood guard, strengthened by the countless prayers of our church family. "Your husband's suffering," Jesus said gently, "has become a battleground where faith confronts doubt, where love confronts fear, where trust confronts despair. Through his unwavering faith in the midst of pain, many are finding their way to me." I watched in amazement as James's quiet expressions of faith, even in his weakest moments, sent ripples of light through the hospital, touching doctors, nurses, and other patients in ways he could never know. But the most profound revelation came when Jesus showed me the spiritual impact of simple acts of love and faith. A nurse's quiet prayer while changing James's IV, a doctor's moment of compassion, our grandchildren's innocent trust in God's goodness, each of these created bursts of light that pushed back the darkness. Even in our suffering, we were part of a greater battle, and our faith was a weapon of light. "This is why I allow suffering," Jesus explained, his eyes filled with both love and tears. "Through it, my children learn to fight with weapons of faith, hope, and love. These are stronger than any darkness." The truth of his words was demonstrated before my eyes as I watched how our family's faithful endurance of trials had strengthened not just our own faith, but had created a spiritual fortress that protected and inspired others. The intensity of the heavenly light shifted, and Jesus guided me to what appeared to be a vast gallery of living memories and future possibilities. "Clara," he said, his voice filled with both authority and tenderness, "now you must witness what is to come, not just for your family, but for all who will be touched by your testimony." The first vision materialized like a living photograph. I saw Sarah, my precious granddaughter, 20 years in the future. She stood at a podium, sharing her testimony with thousands. When I was 9, she was saying, "I watched my grandparents' unwavering faith in the face of death." That's when I knew God was real. The vision expanded, showing how her testimony would inspire a movement of faith among young people, bringing an entire generation back to God. But then the scene darkened, showing another possible future. I saw Michael, our youngest grandson, struggling with doubt in his college years. The spiritual battle around him was intense, angels and demons fighting for his very soul. This child, Jesus explained, will face a crisis of faith that will either destroy him or transform him into a powerful witness for my kingdom. The visions continued, each more intense than the last. I saw our church community expanding, reaching the lost and broken in ways we never imagined. But with growth came challenges, false teachings threatening to creep in, leaders facing temptation, families struggling to maintain their faith in an increasingly hostile world. "Your prayers now," Jesus emphasized, "will build spiritual foundations for battles yet to come." He showed me how each sincere prayer created spiritual strongholds that would protect future generations. I watched in awe as our simple Wednesday night prayer meetings generated waves of protective light that would shield our community for decades. Then came the hardest vision to bear. I saw Emily, our middle granddaughter, walking away from her faith entirely. The pain in my heart was unbearable, but Jesus gently turned my face to see more. "Watch," he commanded. Years passed in moments, and I saw how Emily's prodigal journey, though painful, would eventually lead to a testimony more powerful than if she had never strayed. Her return to faith could inspire countless others who had wandered far from God. The gallery shifted to show our small town transformed. Churches that had been half empty were now filled with new believers. Prayer groups met in homes, schools, and businesses. The spiritual atmosphere had changed dramatically, and I could see the direct connection between our present trials and this future revival. "Your family's suffering," Jesus explained, "will plant seeds of faith that will bear fruit for generations." He showed me how James's peaceful acceptance of his illness would inspire doctors to explore their own spirituality, how our grandchildren's prayers would spark a youth revival in their schools, how our church's support during our trials would become a model for other congregations. But there were warnings too. I saw how the enemy would try to twist our testimony, using our trials to make others doubt God's goodness. Many will ask, Jesus said, why a loving God would allow such suffering? Your response to this question will determine whether they find faith or fall into deeper doubt. The visions expanded to show global events, spiritual awakening in unexpected places, persecution of believers, and the increasing tension between faith and secularism. Your story, Jesus explained, will become a source of strength for many during these times. They will remember how you chose faith over fear, trust over bitterness. Then came a deeply personal revelation. Jesus showed me how my own heart would be tested through these trials. I saw moments of doubt that would threaten to overwhelm me, nights of desperate prayer, times when my faith would hang by a thread. These moments, he said tenderly, will become your greatest testimony. Through your weakness, my strength will be revealed. Finally, Jesus showed me the ripple effect of one single act of faith. Like dropping a stone in a pond, I watched as our family's decision to trust God through suffering created waves that touched life after life, generation after generation. The impact was far greater than anything we could have achieved through prosperity or ease. The visions faded, and Jesus turned to me with an expression that held both love and solemnity. Now, Clara, he said, you must see the personal journey that lies ahead, your own path of growth through suffering. What followed was an intimate revelation of my own spiritual transformation that would occur through our trials. The first scene showed me beside James's hospital bed, exhausted and struggling to maintain my usual optimistic faith. I watched my future self wrestle with doubt for the first time in decades. Lord, my future self whispered in the darkness, I've always trusted you, but why? Why must he suffer so much? The raw honesty of that prayer sent unexpected waves of light through the spiritual realm. It is in these moments of honest questioning, Jesus explained, that real faith is forged. Anyone can believe when all is well, but faith refined by fire becomes unshakable. I watched as each difficult moment, each sleepless night, each painful decision, each financial struggle stripped away layers of superficial faith to reveal something deeper and more genuine. The vision shifted to show me learning lessons I never expected. There was a scene of me receiving help from people I had always been the one to help, a humbling experience that would teach me about grace from the receiving end. I saw myself learning to accept meals from church members, to let others clean my house, to receive instead of always giving. Pride, Jesus said gently, often hides behind service. Sometimes the greatest growth comes through learning to receive. Then came harder scenes, moments when well-meaning friends would offer religious platitudes that once brought comfort but now felt hollow. I watched my future self learn to reject superficial Christianity and embrace a deeper, more authentic relationship with God. Through your suffering, Jesus explained, you will help others move beyond simple answers to find real faith. The visions showed me discovering strength I never knew I had. There were moments when I would be exhausted beyond measure, yet find supernatural strength to continue caring for James, supporting our grandchildren, and maintaining my prayer life. My power, Jesus reminded me, is made perfect in weakness. Through these trials, you will experience this truth in new ways. I saw myself learning to find joy in unexpected places, in the gentle squeeze of James's hand, in the sound of our grandchildren's prayers, in the quiet moments of early morning devotions. True joy, Jesus taught, is not dependent on circumstances. Through suffering, you will learn to find me in every moment, and therein lies unshakable joy. The scene shifted to show me facing one of my greatest fears, the possibility of losing James. I watched my future self learn to hold him with open hands, trusting God's plan even when it differed from my desires. This lesson would transform not just my relationship with James, but all my relationships, teaching me to love without clinging, to trust without controlling. Then came a surprising revelation. I saw how my own suffering would open doors to minister to others in ways I never could have otherwise. People who would never have listened to my testimony before would be drawn to the authenticity of faith tested by fire. Your scars, Jesus said, will become channels of healing for others. The vision showed me learning to worship in a new way. No longer would my praise be based only on God's blessings, but on His unchanging nature, even in trials. I watched my future self singing hymns in the hospital chapel, my voice stronger and more genuine than ever before, because now I understood the depth of what I was singing. Finally, Jesus showed me the ultimate personal transformation that would occur through our trials. Watch, he said, as scenes of my life played out. I saw how each challenge, each tear, each moment of surrender would gradually transform me into a clearer reflection of Christ. The Clara who would emerge from these trials would be different, humbler, deeper, more compassionate, and more powerful in spiritual warfare. The atmosphere in heaven suddenly changed, becoming charged with divine electricity. Jesus' expression grew more intense as he said, "Clara, now you must witness the ultimate battle that your testimony will help prepare others to face." The scene before us transformed into what I can only describe as a cosmic battlefield. I saw our small town from a spiritual perspective, but this time the view was different. Massive armies of angels were gathering, their armor gleaming with heavenly light. Above our church, a spiritual fortress had formed, built from years of prayers, worship, and faithful service. But surrounding this fortress, darkness gathered with an intensity that made my soul tremble. "What you are about to witness," Jesus explained, his voice resonating with divine authority, "is the culmination of generations of spiritual warfare. Your family's testimony will become a weapon in this battle." I watched in awe as scenes from our journey, every prayer, every tear, every moment of unwavering faith transformed into what appeared to be arrows of light in the angels' quivers. The battle began with an assault of doubt. I saw dark forces targeting the minds of believers, especially the young. But then something extraordinary happened. Sarah, my granddaughter, stood in her high school classroom, fearlessly sharing how her grandfather's faith in his final days had transformed her life. Her testimony created a shield of light that protected not just her classmates, but spread throughout the school. Then came an attack of despair. Wave after wave of hopelessness crashed against the spiritual fortress of our community. But the prayers we had prayed during our darkest hours now became beacons of hope. I watched in amazement as memories of James's peaceful smile in the midst of suffering became a source of strength for others facing similar trials. "This is why your suffering has purpose," Jesus said, gesturing to the battle unfolding before us. "Every tear you shed in faith becomes a weapon against darkness." I saw how our church's unity in supporting our family had created bonds that the enemy couldn't break. When the attack of division came, these bonds held firm. The intensity of the battle increased. Above the hospital where James lay, a particularly fierce conflict raged. Angels fought to maintain an atmosphere of peace and faith, while dark forces sought to sow bitterness and despair. But the prayers of our Wednesday night prayer group formed a protective dome over the entire medical center. I watched as our grandchildren, now grown, became powerful warriors in this spiritual battle. Emily's return to faith after her season of doubt became a testimony that broke the chains of unbelief binding others. Michael's decision to become a pastor, inspired by his grandfather's example, created a stronghold of truth that the enemy couldn't penetrate. Then came the most intense moment of the battle. A wave of darkness threatened to overwhelm the entire community, but just when things seemed darkest, thousands of prayers we had prayed years ago during our trials burst forth like shooting stars. Each prayer, preserved in heaven's archives, released its power at exactly the right moment. Your family's suffering, Jesus explained, has created an arsenal of tested faith that will help others endure when darkness seems strongest. I saw how every moment of choosing trust over bitterness, faith over fear, love over resentment, had been transformed into spiritual ammunition for this crucial battle. The scene expanded to show how our testimony had spread far beyond our small town. Stories of our faithfulness in trials had reached people across the world, strengthening them for their own battles. What we had endured in our small hospital room had become a source of power for believers facing persecution, families enduring their own health crises, and communities fighting spiritual darkness. In the midst of this cosmic battle, Jesus turned to me with an expression of infinite love and solemnity. "Clara," he said, "now comes your moment of greatest testing." The scene shifted to my hospital room, where my physical body lay surrounded by medical equipment, while nearby, James continued his own battle with cancer. "You must make a choice," Jesus explained, "that will determine not just your family's future, but the spiritual destiny of many others." Before me appeared 3 doors of light. Through the first, I saw James being miraculously healed, our family rejoicing, but our testimony remaining ordinary. Through the second, I saw myself waking up to continue our journey of suffering, but our story touching countless lives. The third door remained mysteriously closed. The enemy, Jesus continued, will offer you what seems to be a perfect solution healing for both you and James. But this blessing would come with hidden chains. I watched as this scenario played out, showing how such a miracle, granted through compromise rather than God's timing, would ultimately lead many to superficial faith that would crumble in harder times. A vision appeared of our grandchildren in the future. In this scenario where we accepted the enemy's offer, they grew up believing in a prosperity gospel, their faith shallow and untested. But in the path of endurance, they developed unshakable faith, becoming powerful witnesses for God's faithfulness in suffering. Then Jesus revealed something that broke my heart. If I chose the path of miraculous healing, thousands who would have been touched by our testimony of faithfulness in suffering would remain in darkness. I saw faces of people I would never meet in this life, whose lives would be transformed by how we handled our trials. Your suffering, Jesus said gently, has purpose beyond what you can see. He showed me how each moment of choosing faith in the darkness would create ripples of hope that would touch lives for generations. Our family's journey would become a testament to God's faithfulness, not in removing suffering, but in providing strength to endure it. The hardest vision came next. I saw James's final days, filled with both pain and supernatural peace. But I also saw how his quiet faith in those moments would impact doctors, nurses, and other patients in ways a miracle never could. His death would not be a defeat, but a testimony to the reality of faith that transcends circumstances. This is not about choosing suffering, Jesus explained, seeing the anguish in my heart. It's about choosing trust in my greater purpose. He showed me how our story would become a cornerstone of hope for others facing similar trials, a testimony that would strengthen the faith of countless believers facing their own battles. Then Jesus revealed the contents of the third door, and I gasped. Through it, I saw how our present suffering was actually protecting our family from greater trials that would have come otherwise. Our current path, though painful, was actually God's mercy in disguise. This revelation brought a peace that surpassed all understanding. Clara, Jesus said, taking my hands in his, will you trust me, even when the path leads through the valley of shadows? Will you accept that sometimes my greatest gifts come wrapped in pain? Looking into his eyes, I saw the same love that had led him to the cross. How could I choose differently when he had sacrificed everything for us? With tears, but also with unshakable conviction, I made my choice. Your will be done, Lord, I whispered. If our suffering can bring glory to your name and hope to others, I accept this path. The moment I spoke these words, heaven itself seemed to pause, and I felt the approval of countless witnesses to my decision. The heavenly visions dimmed, and Jesus' expression grew solemn as he said, now, Clara, you must witness the darkest moments that lie ahead, moments that will test your faith to its very limits. What unfolded before me was a series of trials that made my heart ache with anticipation. In the first scene, I saw myself sitting alone in our empty house, the silence deafening after James had been rushed to intensive care. Our savings had been depleted, bills were piling up, and for the first time in my life, I felt utterly abandoned. My future self picked up the Bible that had brought so much comfort, but the words seemed to blur through tears of exhaustion and doubt. Where are you, my future self whispered into the darkness? Why have you forsaken us? The raw honesty of that moment sent shivers through my spirit. I watched as the simple faith I had known all my life was stripped away, leaving something deeper but infinitely more painful in its place. Then came the hardest blow. Our church, which had been so supportive, began to fracture. Some members, watching our continued suffering, started questioning God's goodness. Others, uncomfortable with prolonged suffering, gradually withdrew their support. I saw longtime friends avoiding eye contact after Sunday services, their own faith shaken by our unanswered prayers. The scene shifted to our grandchildren. Young Michael, struggling to understand why God wouldn't heal his grandfather, stopped praying altogether. Sarah, whose childhood faith had been so pure, began asking questions that no one could answer. Emily, our teenage granddaughter, faced ridicule at school when she tried to defend God's goodness in the face of our family's suffering. I watched as Rebecca, our eldest daughter, reached her breaking point. After another sleepless night at the hospital, she broke down in the chapel. I've tried to be strong, Mom, she sobbed to my future self. but I can't do this anymore. What kind of God allows such suffering?" The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, unanswered. The financial burden became crushing. I saw myself standing in line at a food bank, me, who had always been the one helping others. The humiliation burned, but worse was the nagging question, had God forgotten us? The mortgage payment was late, medical bills mounted, and each day brought new challenges that seemed beyond our ability to bear. Then came a moment that nearly broke me, watching my future self discover James's private journal. In it, he had written of his own struggles with doubt, his fears of leaving me alone, his questions about God's plan. The raw honesty of his words revealed that even his seemingly unshakable faith had been tested to its limits. "These moments of darkness," Jesus explained gently, "will become the foundation of your most powerful testimony. For in your weakness my strength will be revealed." But as I watched these scenes unfold, I wondered how anyone could endure such deep testing of faith. The scene shifted to the hospital room, where I witnessed the moment I had been dreading most. James lay peacefully in his bed, his once strong frame now fragile, while our entire family gathered around him. The machines that had been keeping track of his vital signs began their ominous slowing, each beat more distant than the last. "Even in this deepest valley," Jesus said softly, "watch how my presence never leaves." I saw how, even as grief threatened to overwhelm us, small miracles occurred. James opened his eyes one last time, and with unexpected clarity, spoke words that would sustain our family through the darkest times ahead. "I see heaven. It's so beautiful. Don't weep for me. Keep believing." The days following James's passing were a blur of pain and contradictions. I watched my future self moving through funeral arrangements with mechanical precision, answering calls of condolence with practiced gratitude, yet feeling completely hollow inside. The house, once filled with the sound of medical equipment and visiting caregivers, now echoed with an unbearable silence. Our grandchildren's reactions carved new wounds in my heart. Sarah, trying to be strong, refused to cry until she found her grandfather's Bible, marked with his familiar highlighting and notes. Michael withdrew completely, his teenage anger at God manifesting in slammed doors and refused family prayers. Emily, the sensitive one, developed anxiety, afraid that others she loved would suddenly leave too. The physical toll of grief manifested in unexpected ways. I saw myself losing weight, forgetting to eat, walking through our garden, James's pride and joy, without really seeing the flowers. Sleep became elusive, filled with dreams of him that left me more exhausted than refreshed. Even prayer, once as natural as breathing, became a struggle. Financial reality hit hard after the funeral. Medical bills continued to arrive, each one a paper reminder of our loss. The insurance company disputed some of the final treatments, adding bureaucratic stress to raw grief. I watched myself sitting at our kitchen table late at night, surrounded by bills and memories, wondering how to keep our home of 40 years. Then came the first holiday without him, Thanksgiving, James's favorite. The empty chair at the table seemed to mock our attempts at normalcy. Traditional family recipes he loved sat untouched, no one having the heart to serve them. When it came time for the traditional giving of thanks, the silence was deafening until little Rachel, our youngest grandchild, said simply, "I'm thankful Grandpa's not hurting anymore." The hardest moments were the small ones, reaching for his hand during church services that weren't there, waking up to make his morning coffee before remembering, finding his half-finished crossword puzzle with notes in his handwriting. Each discovery was like losing him all over again. These moments, Jesus explained, will become bridges of understanding to others walking through grief. Just when the weight of grief seemed unbearable, Jesus gestured, and the scene before us transformed. "Now, Clara," he said, his voice filled with triumph, "witness how every tear you've shed becomes a seed of hope." The visions that followed took my breath away. I saw Emily, our doubting granddaughter, standing before a group of teenagers at a youth retreat. When my grandfather died, she was saying, her voice strong with conviction, "I thought my faith died too." But now I understand that his death taught me what real faith looks like. The room was silent, dozens of young people transfixed by her words about finding God in life's darkest moments. The scene shifted to the hospital where James had spent his final days. A young doctor was sharing our story with a terminal patient. I watched this couple face death with such peace, such faith. It changed how I practice medicine. I saw how this doctor had begun praying with willing patients, bringing spiritual healing alongside physical care. Then came a vision that brought tears to my eyes. Michael, our angry grandson who had turned from God, was kneeling by his bed, clutching his grandfather's worn Bible. God, he prayed, I finally understand what Grandpa meant about suffering producing perseverance. I want the kind of faith he had. His return to faith would eventually lead him to become a counselor, helping others navigate grief and loss. A series of quick scenes followed. Our church had started a grief support ministry inspired by our journey. Families facing similar trials found hope in hearing how we'd walked through the valley of shadows. The meals and care we'd received during James's illness had sparked a movement of practical compassion in our community. Your pain, Jesus explained, has created channels for my love to flow to others. I watched as our story spread beyond our small town, touching lives we would never know about in this lifetime. A book of James's journal entries, published by our children, was bringing comfort to readers around the world. Most surprisingly, I saw how our financial struggles had led to unexpected blessings. Our transparency about these challenges had broken down walls of shame in our church community. Others began sharing their own financial burdens, leading to a beautiful movement of mutual support and practical care. Sarah, who had witnessed our entire journey as a child, had grown into a powerful voice for authentic faith. My grandparents taught me that trusting God doesn't mean we don't feel pain, she often testified. It means we believe He's present in the pain. Her message was reaching a generation disillusioned with superficial Christianity. This, Jesus said tenderly, is why I allowed your suffering. Through it, you and James became witnesses to a deeper truth, that my love transcends circumstances, that faith can flourish even in life's winters. The evidence was undeniable as I watched life after life transformed through our testimony of enduring faith. The heavenly vision shifted one final time as Jesus said, "Now, Clara, see how your own story of redemption becomes complete." What unfolded before me was a testament to how God's love can transform even the deepest pain into purpose. I watched my future self, 1 year after James's passing, standing in our garden that had once fallen into neglect during his illness. The flowers were blooming again, not just James's favourites but new varieties too. Each Saturday, neighbourhood children would come to learn about gardening, and in those moments, I found myself sharing stories about faith, love, and perseverance through the simple act of tending to God's creation. The transformation extended beyond the garden. Our home, which had once felt unbearably empty, became a sanctuary for others facing similar trials. Weekly prayer meetings shifted from mere gatherings to powerful encounters with God's presence. People would later say they felt James's legacy of faith living on in those moments of shared worship and tears. Then came a scene that brought tears to my eyes. Our entire family gathered for Christmas, the first time everyone had been together since the funeral. The empty chair at the table remained, but now it stood as a testament rather than a source of pain. Michael led the prayer, his voice strong as he thanked God for his grandfather's example. Emily played James's favourite hymns on the piano, and even little Rachel shared memories of her grandfather's stories about Jesus. Your healing, Jesus explained, becomes complete when you help others find their way through similar valleys. I saw myself counselling young widows, sharing not just sympathy but hard-earned wisdom about finding God's strength in weakness. The support group that had formed in our church was touching lives far beyond our congregation, as others learned that grief shared becomes grief transformed. Most remarkably, I witnessed how my own relationship with God had deepened through the valley of loss. Prayer was no longer a list of requests, but an intimate conversation with one who had carried me through the darkest nights. Bible verses that had once been familiar took on new depth as I experienced their truths in profound ways. The financial miracle unfolded gradually, but undeniably. Through a series of events that could only be attributed to divine intervention, not only were all the medical bills eventually paid, but our home became free and clear. This blessing enabled us to host missionaries, support other families in crisis, and create a scholarship in James's name for seminary students. "This is my promise fulfilled," Jesus said gently. "Beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, Praise instead of despair, I watched as each piece of our broken story was woven into a tapestry of redemption that touched countless lives. What Satan had meant for destruction, God had transformed into a testimony of his faithfulness. As the final visions of redemption faded, Jesus turned to me with eyes full of infinite love and wisdom. "Now, Clara," he said, "it is time for you to return. But first, see how your story concludes in ways you could never imagine." The scene before us shifted to 5 years after James's passing. Our home, once heavy with grief, had become a beacon of hope in the community. Every Wednesday evening, dozens gathered in our living room, cancer patients, grieving widows, struggling families, all finding strength in shared stories of God's faithfulness through trials. I watched as Michael, now a counselor, led support groups in the very hospital where his grandfather had spent his final days. My grandfather's death nearly destroyed my faith, he would tell them, but his life and how our family walked through that valley showed me what real faith looks like. The doctors who had cared for James would often refer their terminal patients to these groups, recognizing that healing comes in many forms. Sarah had followed in my footsteps as a Sunday school teacher, but with a depth that only comes from weathering storms. God doesn't promise to keep us from pain, she would tell her students, but he promises to walk through it with us. Her classes became so popular that other churches asked her to train their teachers in discussing difficult questions about faith and suffering. The garden had flourished beyond anything James could have imagined. What began as personal therapy became a community healing space. Cancer patients would sit among the flowers during their treatments, finding peace in the beauty James had planted. Children from the church's grief support group would help tend the plants, learning about life, death, and renewal through nature's cycles. Emily, whose faith had once nearly shattered, now led worship at our church. The songs she wrote about finding God in darkness touched hearts in ways that simpler praise never could. These aren't just songs. She would say, they're testimonies of God's faithfulness when we can't see the way forward. Our family gatherings had evolved into something beautiful. The empty chair at holiday meals remained, but now it inspired stories of faith and gratitude rather than tears. Even little Rachel, who had been too young to remember her grandfather well, knew him through the legacy of faith he'd left behind. Most remarkably, I saw how my own story had become a source of strength for others. Women facing similar trials would seek me out, not for answers, but for the comfort of knowing someone else had walked this path and found God faithful. Your honesty about doubt, they would tell me, gave me permission to be real with God. This, Jesus explained, is the power of a testimony forged in fire. It lights the way for others to find hope in their own darkness. I watched as our family's journey became a living testament to the truth that faith doesn't mean absence of pain, but presence of purpose. "Clara," Jesus said, his voice filled with both tenderness and urgency, "the time has come for you to return. Remember everything you've seen, for many will find hope through your testimony." With these words, he shared his final revelations and instructions. I saw how our story would become a beacon of hope for countless others facing their own valleys of shadow. Through our journey, people would learn that faith isn't about avoiding suffering, but finding God's purpose within it. Every tear we shed, every doubt we faced, every moment of choosing trust over bitterness would light the way for others following behind. "Tell them," Jesus instructed, "that I never leave nor forsake my children, even in their darkest hours. Tell them that every prayer is heard, every tear is counted, and every moment of suffering has purpose." His words burned into my soul with divine authority, and I knew they would sustain me through the trials ahead. Then he showed me one final vision, a vast tapestry of interconnected lives, each thread representing someone who would be touched by our testimony. I saw families finding strength to face their own health crises, marriages surviving severe trials, and faith growing deeper through tears. Our story wasn't just about us anymore, it had become part of God's larger story of redemption. Share these truths, Jesus continued, not from a place of having all the answers, but from a heart that has learned to trust through trials. Let your wounds become windows through which others see my grace. I understood then that our suffering would become a bridge over which others could walk to find hope. As the heavenly light began to fade, Jesus gave me his final charge. "Remember, Clara, that in your weakness, my strength is made perfect." The darkest valleys often lead to the highest mountaintops of faith. Trust Maine in the journey. With these words, he placed his hand on my heart, and I felt his peace flood my soul. The sensation of returning to my body began, but before the heavenly vision completely faded, Jesus left me with one last truth: your story isn't over, Clara. It's just beginning. Every person who hears your testimony will face a choice: to trust me in their own valleys or to turn away. Your faithfulness will help them choose wisely. As consciousness returned and I felt the weight of my physical body once again, I knew with unshakable certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The pain was still there, the challenges still real, but now they were infused with divine purpose. Every moment of our journey, even the darkest ones, would become a testament to God's faithfulness. Opening my eyes to find myself back in our bedroom, surrounded by our frightened family and concerned medical personnel, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The journey ahead would be difficult, but now I understood its purpose. Our story of faith through fire would become a light for others finding their way through darkness. Dear friends, if this story has touched your heart and resonated with your own journey of faith, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and reflections could bring hope to others facing similar trials. If you found value in this message, please support our team by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with your loved ones. Each like, comment, and share helps spread this testimony of hope and faith to those who need it most. Together, we can build a community of support and encouragement, reminding others that they're not alone in their struggles.